About the secret origins of the medical data business. And many of you know that he's been working on the digital age and data for several years now, and he's a fellow at Harvard, of course, where he belongs. And so Adam, would you come up and interpret that wonderful start to our day, the music?
Thanks very much. The opening tune that we just heard was Joe Cocker's Feelin' All Right. And the reason why I played that is because he's broadcasting his own medical health. I'm not feeling too good myself. And we often don't know it, but we are broadcasting throughout the days, not only our personal lives, but a lot of medical details, which you saw some details of in the talk yesterday about LaTanya Sweeney on the data map. And I wanted to talk today about how this situation came to be, that there is a multi-billion-dollar trade in our personal health data that we don't know about it. As Deb mentioned, I have a book upcoming on this. This is my second book. My first book looked at the business of personal data that excluded health data. And this next book, which comes out in January, Our Bodies, Our Data, looks at the evolution of this business and how it became such a rich, lucrative business with great potential to help advance health, but also potential dangers to privacy and things that we don't expect. And I wanted to just recall for a moment some of the surprise, as I've talked about some of my initial findings, even within the profession, how people don't really know how extensive this trade is. So in November, I had the opportunity to spend a month finishing this book at a place called Bellagio in Italy. And this is a center where various scholars come and they do their writing. And there's a series of conferences that take place in another part of the campus. And one day, deans of public health and deans of the schools of medicine of various universities came. And I asked for the opportunity to address them and tell them a little what I had found about this trade in medical data, because I figured these were the people who would really know about it. They're the schools of public health, the people you want to have our medical data to be able to advance medicine and science. And these were many of the most prestigious universities in the United States, and several of them remarked, we either didn't know or had no idea that this trade was so vast. So I wanted to step back a little bit today and tell you how this evolved. Now, you saw this map yesterday from LaTanya Sweeney. She talked about you, the patient. You're spreading a lot of information into a system that monetizes your data, typically anonymously. So it's you, female, this age, at this postal zip code, and that information is matched with other kind of data. So this is the kind of information that a big medical data broker or medical data miner, such as IMS Health, will have. And just to go over it, it will be medical claims, the things from your insurance, mobile data, non-retail outlets, hospital emergency health records, EHR records, software, genome registries that are opt-in, patient registries, payer private claims, government health plans, pharmacy claims. There's a lot of data that it makes up a system like this. And IMS Health is the biggest of the data miners. I should point out also that there is a difference between data brokers that we talked about yesterday in discussion with Mary. That's name data, Mary's name, her address, her phone number, her email, and anonymized data. So this is anonymized data, but it is a dossier about you. It is Mary, but it doesn't have her name. It says female, this age, in this place, and it may have her blood tests, her electronic health records, her insurance forms, all sorts of details gathered over time into what is called a longitudinal record. IMS Health, who put together this chart, is the largest of these companies, the most successful, with a very deep history. And even in the last few weeks, they have doubled in size through the latest of their mergers, and throughout their history, they've had many acquisitions. Today, they have insights on more than 90% of worldwide pharmaceuticals. They have 45 billion transactions a year that they're able to monitor in more than 100 companies. Now, I would like to talk about how this and other similar businesses have evolved over time, because a lot of this has taken place without any public scrutiny. So they know a lot about you and you and you and you through these anonymized dossiers, we don't know so much about them. So the origins of the story go back quite far in time to the earlier 20th century and the evolution of marketing data. So one of the great fathers of marketing data is this man here, Arthur Charles Nielsen, A.C. Nielsen, who's best known, the company best known today for its television and radio ratings. But when the Nielsen Company started in 1923, it was about measuring sales in different markets. A decade later, in 1933, he started the Nielsen Drug Index. And what they did was they bought from pharmacies, 750 nationwide, their invoices to see what was coming in the door, so that they could say, oh, drug A is selling this well, this drug B is selling this well. It was a market survey, and just based on this broad details. Now, of course, today's story will build upon this to how it gets to the very individual data, but it takes time over the years. Nielsen staffers also went to stores and they would count products on the shelves. Here's how many Alka-Seltzers, here's how many different products. And through this technique, they were able to estimate the sales and marketing for the different drugs. And this was the product, the Nielsen survey. It was very helpful for planning when you would advertise. Would you advertise in the spring? Were there particular markets, different parts of the country that would need to have these insights? So it was very helpful for the pharmaceutical companies to have a broad range of ideas of what to do. Other companies also entered this business. One important one was called Davy, Colline, and Keating. So this is a marketing survey company. This is something from 1950 that they studied whether family income was correlated to the size of the television that you bought, the screen. And in this case, it wasn't. Eventually, Davy, Colline, and Keating started focusing on, in particular, the pharmaceutical drug market. And again, they based it on receipts that they were able to buy from the pharmacy. So it wasn't individual prescriptions, it's how much stuff is coming in the door. But it's a little imprecise because you don't know how much is being sold. Now, in the 1940s, after World War II, you began to have the first time the monitoring of the prescriptions. So in other words, stuff coming in the door is what the early marketers were looking at. But the prescriptions that they receive at the counter are stuff that is actually selling. And that's the most accurate measurement of what is the most successful drugs, the most popular things. And again, this is quite useful for marketing, for sales, for planning, if you're working in that industry. This was from 1947, and it's a general report on the pharmaceutical survey. It says, an analysis of 13,125 prescriptions collected in November 1946 from pharmacies in 186 villages. So this is the first account that I have been able to find of people going and gathering in a systematic fashion the prescriptions of individuals to see what's selling. And then this long academic style report suggests that each college and study of pharmacy undertakes similar studies to understand the pharmaceutical market. So we're moving already in this early period after World War II into the sale of specific prescription data. So it's becoming a little more intimate because it's not just the bulk sale of stuff going in the door. This is what individual patients are saying or are buying. So, and again, this recommendation that other people do it. So one of the people who was very successful in taking up this challenge to study the sale of pharmacy drugs is this man here, Ray Gosselin. He's a guy that was a hero of World War II, barely survived an attack and came back. And like many men of the generation, had this great experience which they were able to apply for their business as well. And as a graduate student in pharmacy, he decided to go out and study what different pharmacies within the state of Massachusetts were selling. And he sent out various other graduate students who were volunteers to go and ask pharmacies, can we see your records? Can you let us see a sampling of different pharmacy records? He wanted to estimate the average cost of drugs, determine the common ingredients, calculate other statistics related to the sales of pharmaceuticals. And in 1947, he published his thesis, Massachusetts Prescription Survey, 1947. And this is just a little chart. He has the various cities that he is, where he sends agents, and it's supposed to be a balanced, weighted measurement of different places to get a better sense statewide of what's selling and what is not selling very well. And in fact, he sends people to 2,142 pharmacies. So it's a pretty ambitious project done in old-style manual copying by hand way in this period of time. This is what the students were carrying. For each prescription, they would tick off whether it was a liquid, a pill, the various ingredients that might be in it, the dosages, and so on. And they gathered thousands of these for him to put together the survey. So, and there was a specific scientific method, 48 prescriptions at each store, 12 from each season. And this was the beginning of the scientific survey of what pharmacies were selling on a prescription by prescription basis. Now, as these students were going through the files, the pharmacists were quite happy to help the students advance their education, but they did let them behind the counter. They could see specific prescriptions and names. So this is the first time you're kind of nearing to the individual level. Now, this survey was not interested in the names, it's interested in other things, but there is this potential of a problem from the access of that information. And these are the kinds of things that he found. He had a lot of numbers and charts in his thesis. How much was the average prescription? In 1947, it was $1.42. How many of the, what percentage of the ingredients were written in Latin? 2.6%. He noted frequent misspellings. Sometimes he saw that things were dangerously misprescribed, whether they were caught by the pharmacy or so on. Now, all of this, even though this was only a graduate research, this interested pharmaceutical companies quite a bit. And one of them said to him, hey, we would like you to do something like this for us. And one of them offered to pay him $2,000 to do a report based on this kind of methodology. $2,000 for a graduate student in 1947 was quite a good amount of money. So Gosselin kind of refines the forms that he's doing. He repeats the surveys in 1948 and 1950. He expands the number of drugstores. He gets 5% of the total of the state of Massachusetts. And in 1952, he starts his own business, which is fully dedicated to this surveying. And again, this is about marketing and sales, to help pharmaceutical companies understand the market so they can best sell their products. And he starts this business, which is called the National Prescription Audit, part of what becomes the R.A. Gosselin Company. Here's the company, here's a brochure, and borrowing just a couple $1,000s from family, he sets up in Boston. His wife is helping. Initially, they're working in 15 cities. They expand from 200 pharmacies to 400 to 800, and eventually they're moving nationwide. In the early histories of this business, they relied on volunteer graduate students. So it might be in Chicago. They would say, can you rustle up some students to help us? The students would send in the project. As the survey expanded, they started paying them, and you would get 5%. You would get 5 cents for each individual prescription that you had transcribed. And eventually, he says to the pharmacies themselves, hey, why don't you just send in this information? I'll pay you for that information. So it's becoming a more efficient collection of this information from the pharmacies. 1959, he has another innovation. He says to doctors, listen, let me buy from you a list of what you're prescribing. So, or he would ask them to volunteer it, often saying this will help science and medicine. Please let me know what you're prescribing. Here's a chart, and doctors would fill it out and send it to him. So it was sort of a panel of doctors to get some sense of what they're prescribing there in the office. And there could be a difference between what doctors prescribe and what people actually fill in the pharmacy, because not every pharmacy prescription is actually filled. A fair percentage of them go unfilled. So it could give you some insights when people are not filling out their prescriptions. This is the chart that explains it, but it just goes on to say that gathering data in various ways leads to a greater insight, and this was the promotion, a greater insight on what the pharmaceutical drug market is about. And again, this is not individual data. This is drug A is selling this well in Cleveland, drug B this much, but beginning to get more intimate into the level of the pharmacy data. Now, the company that eventually becomes the dominant player in this field is IMS Health. And eventually they buy up, they take over what is the Gosselin Company, they take over what is the Davy Company. Some of these early pioneers become part of IMS Health. Now, on the website of IMS Health today, They have a timeline of corporate events, and they have a reference to 1954, and it says that Bill Froelich, an advertising executive, and David Dubois, a visionary from IMS, a market research company, form IMS, a market research company that enables organizations to make informed strategic decisions about the marketplace. Now, initially, as I started this work some years ago, I was able to find very little information about who were these guys, what were the circumstances that led to the creation of this business. And I thought maybe there's an interesting story behind it, and indeed it is. And there are some secrets that have been long held related to the formation of this company and the founder of the company that I would like to share with you for the first time today. Now, Bill Froelich, the man that is cited as the advertising executive that helped set up the company, was born Ludwig Wolfgang Froelich in a city outside of Frankfurt. He's born in 1914, just over 100 years ago. And he comes to the United States in 1935. And as he comes to the United States, he transforms from Ludwig Wolfgang Froelich to L.W. Froelich, or Bill Froelich to his friends. And as I began this research, I was looking out for people whom I called the medmen, the people who were involved in the advertising industry of the post-World War II period. So, many of them in their 80s. The oldest person that I talked to that was able to bring this early history to life was 98 at the time that I spoke to him. But one executive who worked at what became Froelich's advertising agency told me the following. He said that Froelich was a man of mystery. He had things hidden all over rocks in different places, and it will be very hard for you to dig this kind of stuff up. And in fact, he was a man of he was a very successful, intelligent, charming executive, but a man of secrets who had rebuilt his own identity to succeed in the world of American business. And what he came over to do is he set up an advertising agency, which became the L.W. Froelich Agency, at a period of great fermentation in the advertising business for drugs. After World War II, there was many miracle drugs, there was a great increase in sales, and it was a great time to be in this business. So his firm emerges as one of the great advertising businesses in New York City at that time. So that's why I call them the medmen. It was sort of like what you have seen in the television show Mad Men, reflecting the period of the 50s and 60s, but specifically focused on the drug advertising business. What these people did was they used grabbing, especially alluring graphics and themes of the time to draw attention to the drugs. And they had very talented artists and copywriters, people like that were working. So these are just a couple of the examples of the ads that the Froelich Agency was using. Some of them may strike you as a little odd in retrospect, but they were successful at the time. Here's an ad that says, "Help keep her this way," which is for an estrogen-related product. But again, it's a grabbing ad, and these were successful in the era. And as I mentioned, Froelich himself, this is the Froelich Agency off to the left on 51st Street. It was a very successful agency, and it grew over time. And Froelich was a commanding executive. And I want you to picture what might have been a typical day in the life of the Froelich Agency. So a little sports car arrived, a chauffeur in a fitted jacket opens the door for Mr. Froelich, the boss. Froelich is spotless in his suit, and he's got a white handkerchief peering out. He's got the Wall Street Journal under his arm, and he's heading into the office. He stops for the elevator. He gets into the elevator. A young employee happens to be there and says, "Good morning, Mr. Froelich." But beyond there, he knows that there's to be a reserve with the boss. And in fact, the employee may have remembered just that attending a meeting, and his supervisor said, "Whatever you do, don't ask Mr. Froelich any questions." This was an older style of more authoritarian leader. What the boss said was what was going to happen in the business. Froelich would arrive to his office upstairs. He would be, again, perfect white collar. He would have his tie pin in place. He was a man that projected power and intelligence. As he passed his reception area, there was a bust of Einstein, and there were various wood panels of of Buddhist figures, and that was the original image as you came in that I was showing. And from there, he would oversee this advertising empire that grew to have 1,000 people in cities all over the world, in New York, London, Paris, Frankfurt, Milan, Madrid, and Tokyo. And eventually he sets up this company, IMS Health, which I'll get to in a moment. But in all of these businesses, not only was he the mastermind from the office, but he used his European culture and sensibilities to entertain clients, the heads of big pharmaceutical companies. In the evening, he had a seat at the Metropolitan Opera. He was friends with some well-known opera singers of that era, Birgit Nilsson, for example. He would socialize in the right places. He was a member of the New York City Athletic Club, the Maidstone Club on Long Island, where he had a house, a posh country club, which had a reputation of excluding blacks and Jews. And all of this added to this kind of awesome reputation that his employees held him in. And one employee recalled half a century later, when I was a young employee, I wanted to be L.W. Froelich when I grew up. So this was a hugely successful enterprise. They had very successful and talented artists working for them. So off to the left, here's a medical advertising of that era with these pictures of cats. And I wanted to ask if anyone has any clue who might be the artist of that. Is there a guess over there?
Caterpillar.
Well, the caterpillar we're not getting to yet. So the cats, who's the cat?
Andy Warhol.
Very good. So very good. It is indeed Andy Warhol. So how did you know that, sir?
It seemed plausible. I knew he did shoe ads.
So very good. Well, I commend you for your great insight into art. So Andy Warhol would show up from time to time at the Froelich and other agencies with drawings, freelance drawings that were used in the advertising. One employee of the Froelich agency was Eric Carle, who's also still alive in his 80s, who's became a very well-known child's author. And this book, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, some of you may have read as a child or later read to your children. But again, this was an environment of artistic fervor related to medical advertising. And even in other areas, every year Froelich would send out these brochures around the Christmas season to various clients on the meaning of life and the totality of living, prayers for peace. There'd be kind of multi-denominational thoughts and whatever. Froelich would personally be involved in these projects. Froelich also bought a radio station in New York City and several other cities. At one point, they hire Aaron Copland to do a year-long program every week. It was Aaron Copland. So again, this is very sophisticated kind of stuff for an executive to be involved in. And Froelich himself was always on the road traveling. These are actually bits of various manifests from boats and planes of trips he took to oversee his worldwide empire in the Far East, in Europe, and so on. But for all of these charms, for all of the influence and success that Froelich had, very few people could say they actually knew him. He remained sort of an enigma of a man, even to the people closest to him in life and within the company. So, and especially when it came to his origins in Germany, people just didn't know what was the motivation for him to come over to the United States. One man whom he eventually became friends with was his chief rival as an advertising man. So there were two big advertising agencies for medical advertising in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. One was the Froelich Agency, and the other was owned by this man, Arthur Sackler. It was called the McAdams Agency. Now, Sackler's name may be better known today because of his great philanthropy. So if you go to the Metropolitan Museum in New York and visit the Dendor Temple from Egypt, that's the Sackler wing. At Harvard, there is a Sackler art collection in Beijing and other places. But both of these men had a fair amount in common. They were born within a few months of each other in 1913. They believed in hard work. They were very much interested in art. Froelich himself built an art collection that was fairly impressive, not nearly as vast as that of Sackler. Here's the Dendor Temple that I mentioned before in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Froelich, though, had a townhouse on 63rd Street in Manhattan. He had works on his own wall by Renoir, Modigliani, John Sargent, Mary Cassatt. So a man sophisticated, using his money, for the opera, for arts, and so on. Now, here's an example of the Sackler agency. They really put Pfizer on the map, as Pfizer was a chemical company with German origins. This ad campaign from the 1950s, Ocular Infections Respond to Broad-Spectrum Terramycin, was really a great success and helped, one of the things that helped make the Sackler agency, called McAdams, very successful. Now, over time in the 1950s, Froelich started to think, well, the way to boost this advertising business is to create a medical survey marketing business, such as I've talked about before with AC Nielsen and others. If we could know what's selling in what markets, this will help the advertising business. So for example, if your drug is selling only 17% in the market, I can go to you and say, you need to advertise more because your drug is only selling 17%. If your drug is selling 83%, I can go to you and say, you need to advertise more to preserve your lead in the market. So it was very useful to have this market advertising business, and that was the origins of IMS Health. He sends this man, David Dubois. He was a kid from Brooklyn who went to NYU. He eventually goes to Columbia Business School. And Froelich sends him to Germany. He's a guy, Dubois doesn't speak German. He sends him in 1956. And he sets up what is called initially the Institut für medizinische Statistik, or IMS. And in English, it's the Intercontinental Marketing Services. What he does is they replicate the model of this company I talked about before, Davy and Keating, DK&K, to study how the market's put together. So he sends this guy off to Germany in 1956. So it's exactly 100 years ago, it's exactly 60 years ago that this is happening. And this survey of the market, what drugs are selling in different parts of Germany, is very successful. It comes out in 1957. So this is the origins of the business of IMS, which is this very successful multi-billion-dollar company today. Incidentally, IMS today highlights, you saw on that timeline, 1954. Basically, nothing happens in 1954, 1955. 56, he goes out there, and 57 is the first product from this company. These executives that work for IMS are very sophisticated and talented international business people. Here's a picture of David Dubois, who's the man I've showed you off to the left. He's the guy that goes out to Germany. In the middle is his wife, who is from a German-born woman. And then his successor eventually is the man off to the right, Lars Eriksson. So he's the second president of IMS Health. Lars Eriksson has been very helpful in my research, and many of the former executives of IMF have been very helpful in my research to help me reconstruct this period about what has been very little known over time. And many of them, as I said, are very proud of their very successful work in expanding this business to multiple countries. And this graphic just shows 57, 58, they're building all these different companies through the 60s, all these different countries that they go to. And so by the early 1970s, they're in large parts of Latin America, they're in North America, good chunks of Western Europe, Iran, Thailand, Australia, Japan. So a very successful international company. And at this stage, again, they're looking at what drug is selling. It's not personal data. It's not what it becomes later. It's this marketing stuff that's very useful for the businesses. 1971, Froelich goes off to vacation in the Caribbean. He comes back to his agency, the L.W. Froelich Agency, and he begins sort of babbling incomprehensibly. He falls to the ground, and he's taken off to the hospital. Some months later, he dies of a brain tumor. He's only 57 years old. Now, the next day after his death, there is an obituary in the New York Times, and a lot of what is in this obituary is not correct. And in fact, a lot of what Froelich had put out there about his own biography and in details about himself is a little bit of an exaggeration or just plainly wrong. So for example, in this biography, It lists some of the things are fairly trivial, such as what year was he born, what was his middle name. It says it's Ludwig William, but it's actually Wilhelm. It misgives the year he came from to the United States. He came not in 1931, as this says. He came in 1935, and then he goes back for a bit. He comes back and permanently lives here in 1936. So these are just small things that he put there. It says that he graduated from the University of Frankfurt, Goethe University. He actually was a dropout after his freshman year, and so on. So it's just interesting that the story of Froelich, even in this one big chance, is full of kind of various omissions or things. And even IMS Health, his most lasting legacy, is only one paragraph of a longer biography. So I was kind of intrigued by this question. Who was this guy? Why did he come over from Germany in the 1930s? And of course, he has this lasting influence that influences us all today, because this company does hold these anonymized dossiers, which of course they say help advance science and medicine. I was not the first to wonder about this. Already in 1943, the FBI is wondering about Froelich, and there's a reference to FBI clearance regarding the investigation of the subject. He has a number of close relatives in Germany and was a member of the German Arbeitsdienst, a student working camp in Germany in 1943. This is what the Arbeitsdienst was. It was a youth work army in effect. They would dig trenches, and they would build bridges. They would do various public works in a period of great unemployment. So Froelich volunteers, joins this in 1933, some months after Hitler comes into power, and he's sent off to Prussia, East Prussia, kind of a far-off part of the country. He's not really meant for hard physical labor. He suffers a hernia soon after, and he's out of the service. But so this question was, was he, and even his employees over the decades, they always wondered, was Froelich a Nazi? Was Froelich a Jew who had escaped from the tyranny of Nazi Germany at the time? But he did not talk about this period, and it remained sort of a mystery to those who worked. Interestingly, this issue of Judaism came to the fore in the early 1950s, just a few blocks from here. One of the copywriters at the Froelich agency, called William Mandel, is called to testify before the McCarthy investigation of communism. And it's one of the most interesting episodes of the whole McCarthy era. This guy, William Mandel, a copywriter at the L.W. Froelich agency, takes the most fierce stand I have ever encountered. The first moments on the stand, Mandel says to Roy Cohen, the investigator for the McCarthy Committee, "I would like to make it clear that I am a Jew." "That you're what?" Cohen asks. "That I'm a Jew." And Cohen says, "So am I, and I don't see why this is an issue here." And then he says, "Well, a Jew who works for McCarthy is thought of very ill by most of the Jewish people in this country." And Mandel was just getting started. I mean, this was a guy not afraid of appearing on national television and fighting back against this at a time when this could end your career and be very substantially damaging. He said, "This is book burning. You lack only the tinder to set fire to the books, as Hitler did 20 years ago." So this was a fiery and brave stance against the McCarthy Committee. But when he came home to New York, Froelich was uneasy about all this national publicity that this guy had gotten. And eventually Froelich fires him just some days later, gives him a month's pay, and he's off. William Mandel, it may have been fortifying for Mandel to be so defiant, because he was still alive and is still alive, just shy of 100. Was 98 when I spoke to him. So anyway, a little bit more about the background of Froelich. I was wondering, so was the Nazi persecution of the Jews a reason why he may have left the country in the 1930s? And again, normally the religion wouldn't be that significant, but in the atmosphere of leaving the Germany in the 1930s under Nazi rule, it becomes more significant. Froelich's lawyer is still alive. He said, no, he's not. He wasn't a Jew. His sister was a Lutheran, and in fact, the man that I showed you who was the second leader of IMS Health, Lars Eriksson, said the sister was in fact anti-Semitic and from time to time would utter things against the Jews. And she was adamant that she was not Jewish, she said. However, the truth is somewhat different. And this is all becoming clear from the archives that I've been able to obtain in Germany and elsewhere, that indeed Froelich was Jewish and he was escaping the persecution or the possible dangers that would exist for someone in Germany at that time. And just to set the stage, Froelich enrolls in university in 1934, just 1 year after Hitler comes to power. Interestingly, already by that time, very early in Nazi rule, they're purging professors from the university at Goethe Institute, where he is studying. A few years later, one of the most notorious figures of the Nazi regime is hired at Goethe Institute, and that's Josef Mengele, who later becomes notorious for his work at Auschwitz. This is Froelich's application to be a student at Goethe University, submitted in 1934. His opening line of the application is one of the most remarkable I've ever read. It doesn't say, I'm interested in studying this subject, here's something about my background. He says, although I am not an Aryan, I wish to apply for admission to the university. He's obliged to fill out a supplementary application for non-Aryan students, and that's what this is, where they ask you questions such as, do you have a parent of Aryan origin? No, none. Do you have a grandparent of Aryan origin? No. Did your father fight on the front in World War I? Yes, and he was wounded, and he has a certificate to prove it. How long has your family been present in Germany? Since around the 15th century. Has your family renounced the German religion? No. Now, again, this wouldn't be so interesting or pertinent, but it helps understand why there would be a motivation of coming to the United States. Froelich had another aspect of his personhood that was also a potential great danger in Nazi Germany, and that was he was gay. So if you were a gay Jew in Nazi Germany, there could be definitely persecution or worse that would come your way. Many of Froelich's relatives come to New York City and join him by 1938. So his sister is there, his mother, his grandmother. The one person that doesn't join him is his father, Leopold. And this is a little snippet from Leopold's birth certificate. 1938, on the very day that the Munich Peace Conference is signed, where Hitler is getting parts of the German Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia, the father apparently says something about Sudeten Germans. He's arrested. Eventually, he's sent to Buchenwald, and in 1940, the father, Ludwig Froelich, is killed in the Holocaust. So this shows the outcome of not leaving Germany. It's this powerful divergence. But again, these are stories that are never spoken about in the history of the company. This is something that is secret. And one person who gave me, this is Froelich on the left-hand corner on a trip to Japan. One person who gave me some good insights as to what the atmosphere in New York and why you would want to not speak openly about this heritage was the lawyer for Arthur Sackler. His name is Michael Sonnenreich. He said you would sit at these meetings, they would tell Jewish jokes, anti-Jewish jokes, and you'd have to sit there and swallow it and laugh along with the boys. So in that tough business atmosphere of the 1950s in New York, even though there were lots of Jews in New York, your heritage could be an obstacle to the business, especially when dealing with pharmaceutical clients from across the country. Now, the even bigger secrets of Froelich only come to public attention after 1971 when he dies, and the company is putting together its first initial public offering. They're going public, selling stocks to anyone who wants to buy them. And so they put together some due diligence, and they realize they don't actually own the company. The people who actually own most of IMS Health are not Froelich, but it's these names, Mortimer Sackler and his brother Raymond Sackler. And so the thought is, wait a minute, the Sacklers, they were the competitors in the ad industry. They were the longtime rivals of Froelich. What is this going on? These are the two brothers of Arthur Sackler. Well, it turns out that of the total sales of the company, Froelich's sister and a charity he set in got $6 million. The Sacklers got $37 million. Now, one of the brothers is still alive. And I called him up in his house and I'm like, can you explain to me how you came to inherit this $37 million with the first public offering of this company? He's like, I had very little to do with that business. I don't really have many recollections about it. He was 94 then, he's 95 now. And in fact, this lawyer told me that that's indeed the case. They put the name of these two brothers into the deed because it was Arthur Sackler who was there at the foundation of IMS Health. So the guy that you thought was your biggest rival in advertising is actually there at the foundation of the company, setting it up from the very beginning. And then indeed, his brothers inherit the bulk of the company when it goes public in 1972. So that's one of the secrets. There's another secret that's actually pretty surprising as well. The right-hand man that Froelich sends to Germany, David Dubois, to set up and be the first president, who serves for many years, he's a guy that actually comes from the world of Sackler. He initially had worked at Sackler's agency, McAdams, before coming over to the Froelich agency. So interestingly, these ties were very strong. And it turns out these two advertising agencies that were the great rivals, and think of Mad Men, where they're rivaling for the accounts and the business, they're doing tricks against each other. That's not taking place. Sackler and Froelich, these two advertising titans on Medicine Avenue, they are dividing up the business. You take this account, I'll take this one. So they're working in cahoots throughout. So this is part of that secret back history that I was talking about. Now to just take the story forward a bit, after the decades after is where the expansion of data collecting is dramatically different at IMS and some of its rival companies. By the 1980s, computerization makes it much easier to store data in pharmacies. Here's an ad from Walgreens that is talking about how convenient it is to have your data digitized so you can go to the pharmacy there or there and you'll have the prescription ready without getting supplementary information. But this digitization of information allows for this great revolution in data gathering by the data mining companies. One person who's important is this figure here, who's called Handel Evans. He was the man who set up IMS operations in Japan and later in the United States from the late 1960s. He eventually leaves the company with a colleague, a former IMS worker, and they set up and buy another company called PDS in 1988. PDS had started ranking individual doctors on what drugs they sell. So Dr. Smith in Cleveland, he's selling a lot of drug A, or he's prescribing a lot of drug A, not so much of drug B. So I'm the salesman from a drug company. I may want to pay a call based on that information. What these guys start doing is they expand the collection of this. So it was very small in the beginning. They buy PDS and they start getting doctor-identified information. So they're buying the prescriptions. You can see Dr. Jones is prescribing this. You can send the salesman there. By the way, this is one of the gifts that you might receive if you were a doctor. This is a Pfizer tie that has little Viagra pills on them. So gifts of this nature and dinners and something are part of these calls that the salesman would make. This is what Shel Silverberg, who was the head of PDS, said at the time. As this doctor-identified data is happening, he said, we weren't going around telling anybody. We had nothing to gain by letting them know. The drug companies did not want their reps telling the doctors they were watching. That's a bad scenario when it happens. And interestingly, throughout the history of the collection of personal data, as it increases over the years, there's always people in the chain who don't know that it's happening. Over time, other companies start doing it. So healthcare claims in the 1980s start to be something that is a commercial product. Companies want to study why are certain kinds of workers often ill, are there certain health tendencies. So they give to these companies to process their health claims information. Some of these companies start selling it, others do not. And they evolve into these companies that are now part of this market, which is growing very rapidly. In 1997, IMS expands into this area and starts collecting electronic medical records from two different health providers. And that's the start of this individualized patient dossier, starting from a few million at that time to today. There's dossiers, sort of extended patient histories on, according to the latest documents, 530 million of people worldwide. Today, also, doctors' electronic health records are selling this kind of information. Again, point out that this is anonymized. It doesn't say Deb Peel, but it says woman this age and this zip code in Austin, Texas is matched with her other information. And over time, other bits are added to it. So for example, you'll see the names of Quest Diagnostics, LabCorp. You may get a blood test that may be put into the system. Not everyone sells. So you'll see on this list Cerner, they do sell. Epic does not sell. So it's a decision of the individual companies. And it's expanded significantly in recent years. As I pointed out, IMS says this is very important for the advancing of science and medicine. This is a page that's certainly worth looking at. Their Institute for Healthcare Informatics, and they point out various studies that have used this data for insights on medicine. And you can look it up for yourself. Now, back to Mr. Froelich. These stories that I've told you today, they've taken place a long time ago. This is deep history. But I think it's pertinent today because a lot of what these companies do in this field of data mining are opaque. They're not transparent as to the gathering of the information that takes place. Now, looking back into the past with the help of many of these former officials, I've been able to understand the world as it evolved with some of this backrooms scheming. But I think it's worth pointing out just to understand that it has not always been operating in the most transparent of ways. And I think if you look at that, it's worth keeping in mind that if Froelich had been open today, he might be operating in a similar manner. Just a few closing words from some former IMS executives. I traveled widely and met with many of them in different countries. This is the man who was the head of IMS Japan. He said, look, during my time, the IMS principle was always that data they provided was only on a consolidated basis and no individual data were disclosed, even anonymously. I have a simple question of what value such anonymized individual data has to IMS clients and how clients can use it. Secondly, wouldn't it break the privacy law even if it was anonymous data? So even former executives of IMS are uncomfortable about this collection of dossier on hundreds of millions of people. This man, Roger Corman, was the former president of IMS in Canada and Latin America. He says, maybe anyone who traffics, that word traffics. Yes, drug traffickers, dope traffickers, info traffickers, people commercially who sell information, maybe they need to do a disclosure. It's hospitals, it's insurance companies, it's claims processors. So bottom line is this trust. You can build the trust. Hopefully this company and its rivals will prosper by being open. They have many good, hardworking, intelligent people that have insights to lend into this field. I don't think there's anything that would hurt their business about being open and transparent. So that's what my work is about, transparency and choice, and I would encourage these companies to embrace this. I think this pattern of hiding what they do from the public is certainly not salutary on the long term. So we're sort of out of time. That's the discussion. Here is my various books, and I thank you very much for listening to me this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. History's fascinating. History's absolutely fascinating. And it's interesting how a man of secrets, founded a company that's, as Adam is saying, we would all hope would be more transparent. The public wants to just be asked, and we need the brains and the research and the data to be used. We want that. Everyone wants that. We're about maximizing the benefits and minimizing the harms. And I think the good news about this company is that with the resources and power that it has, it can move toward becoming trusted. Can do that. We believe that. And powerful story. Thank you, Adam. Thank you for your research. It's actually extraordinary. It's extraordinary. So thank you for giving us a preview of your book. I can only look forward to all the other histories that you have in there on this field. Anyway, thank you. So it's time now that we know more about how this whole kind of industry developed, we're going to be talking with people that are looking at the solutions. And so would the next panel come up? Lisa? Some of you may know Lisa Gallagher. She was the, I think, chief